This man stepped into ice-cold water and didn't come out. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The people around him fell silent because what they were witnessing wasn't normal. Doctors were monitoring his body, his heartbeat, his breathing, his body temperature. According to science, this experiment should have ended long ago. According to logic, this man shouldn't be alive right now. But he was still there. His eyes were open. He was breathing. And he looked calm, as if pain didn't exist. At that moment, everyone thought the same thing. This wasn't a record attempt. This was a challenge to the human body. His name was Wim Hof, but the world would later know him by a different name. The Iceman. Wim Hof wasn't a special child. He wasn't born with superpowers. He didn't come from a wealthy family. Throughout his life, he experienced what everyone experiences. He went to school, worked, got married. He had a normal life, until life hit him in his most vulnerable spot. He lost his wife, and this loss shattered everything inside him. For a long time, he couldn't escape the pain. He spent sleepless nights. He lived with unanswered questions. And at some point, he stopped looking for answers outside. He decided to face it. That confrontation began with the cold. The first time he entered ice-cold water, his body panicked. His breathing sped up uncontrollably. His muscles locked. His brain was screaming, "Get out of here!" But he didn't get out. Because he noticed something. Pain was just a feeling, and maybe it could be controlled. From that day on, for Wim Hof, cold wasn't an enemy. It became a teacher. Every day he pushed himself further. Colder waters, longer durations. In conditions where people couldn't last even a few seconds, he stayed for minutes. Those around him thought he'd gone crazy. Some thought it was a show. But for Wim Hof, this wasn't a show. This was a quest for control. Control over fear. Control over pain. Control over his own body. Over time, things went to even more extreme points. Wim Hof began climbing snowy mountains with almost no protective equipment. He had no boots on his feet, no thick clothes on his body. His breath was steaming, his skin turning purple. But he kept walking, because his mind was telling his body, "We're here and we're safe." The world didn't take this story seriously at first, until scientists got involved. Doctors invited him to laboratories. Sensors were attached. Blood values were measured. Body temperature was monitored moment by moment. And the results shocked everyone. Wim Hof's body wasn't giving the responses it should in the cold. His immune system was giving responses that normal people couldn't give. Stress hormones were under his control. For the first time, science had to admit this. This man could consciously control his body's automatic systems. That's when the doors of the Guinness Book of Records opened. Wim Hof became the person who stayed longest in an ice-filled container. He broke records in sub-zero temperatures. He demolished much of what we knew about the limits of the human body. But for him, the real record wasn't what was written in books. The real record was being able to live without being a prisoner of fear. One day he was asked this question, "Why do you do this?" His answer was simple. Because fear is weaker than we think. Wim Hof was no longer just a record holder. He was teaching people how to breathe, how to face the cold, how to stay in discomfort instead of running from it. Because according to him, modern humanity's biggest problem was comfort addiction, and comfort was slowly weakening people. His method is practiced by thousands of people. Today, athletes, soldiers, doctors, but Wim Hof always says this, "I'm not special. We can all do this." Yet not everyone went as far as he did. Because this path was as much mental as it was physical. It required not tolerance of pain, but peace with pain. But Wim Hof's story doesn't end here. On the contrary, it's just beginning now. Because after he emerged from those icy waters, the world began looking at him with different eyes. He was no longer just the crazy man. He was now a phenomenon. The media was talking about him. Scientists were conducting research on him. And most importantly, people were drawing inspiration from his story. But for Wim Hof, this attention also meant responsibility. Because now he needed to do something not just for himself, but for others as well. In those years, Wim Hof began traveling around the world. He attended seminars. He spoke at conferences. He taught people his method. And every time, he said the same thing. This isn't a miracle. This is a technique. And anyone can learn it. But people had trouble believing him. Because what they saw seemed incredible. How could a person control their body's automatic systems? How could they be so resistant to cold? How could they surpass the limits accepted by science? The answer was simple: breath. Wim Hof's method was based on three things: breathing techniques, cold exposure, and mind control. When these three elements came together, the human body could do incredible things. But this wasn't something that happened overnight. It required years of training and discipline. Wim Hof's breathing technique was actually quite simple. He took deep breaths in and out. Then he held his breath. Then he took deep breaths again. This cycle increased oxygen levels in the body and reduced the stress response. At the same time, it changed the body's pH balance and strengthened the immune system. But there was something deeper behind this technique. Wim Hof said that breathwork wasn't just a physical exercise. It was also a mental exercise, because breath was the bridge between mind and body. And when this bridge was controlled, everything could be controlled. Cold exposure was a way to test this control. Wim Hof recommended people take cold showers. Stand under cold water for a few minutes every day. At first, this was very difficult. The body resisted. The mind wanted to escape. But over time, the body adapted. And more importantly, the mind grew stronger. Because cold wasn't just a physical thing. Cold was also a psychological test. Being able to withstand cold meant being able to withstand discomfort. And being able to withstand discomfort meant being able to withstand many of life's difficulties. Wim Hof had proven this in his own life many times. When he lost his wife, he endured the pain. When he entered icy waters, he endured the cold. When he climbed mountains, he endured fatigue. And every time, he used the power of his mind. But what exactly was mind control? Wim Hof explained it like this. The mind is the master of the body. But most people have forgotten this. Most people have become slaves to their bodies. When they feel pain, they suffer. When they feel cold, they shiver. When they feel fear, they run. But it doesn't have to be this way. If the mind is trained, it can control the body. And Wim Hof had done this training. For years, every day, patiently and determinedly. And the results were clear. One day, Wim Hof went to a lake in northern Netherlands. The temperature was minus 20 degrees. The lake was frozen. He opened a hole in the ice and entered the water. He had no safety equipment with him, just swimming trunks, and he stayed in that icy water for a full hour. 1 hour, 60 minutes. He broke a world record. But for him, this wasn't just a record. It was proof of his mind's power. After that day, Wim Hof's fame grew even more. He started appearing on television programs. He gave talks at the world's most prestigious universities, Harvard, Stanford, MIT. They all invited him, because scientists wanted to understand what he was doing. And research began. Doctors examined Wim Hof's body. They scanned his brain. They took blood samples. They tested his immune system. And they found surprising results. Wim Hof's immune system was different from normal people's. He could control the inflammatory response in his body. He could manage stress hormones. He could even adjust his own body temperature to a degree. But the most important finding was this. This wasn't unique to Wim Hof. Other people could learn this technique too. An experiment was conducted. 12 volunteers were selected. These people were taught Wim Hof's method. They trained for only 10 days. Then a bacteria was injected into their bodies. Normally, this bacteria would create flu-like symptoms in people. Fever, shivering, headache. But in these 12 people, the symptoms were much milder, because they had learned to control their immune systems. This experiment created a shock effect in the medical world, because until now, it was thought that the immune system was completely automatic. But Wim Hof and his team proved this wrong. A human could consciously influence the immune response. This finding was promising for many diseases. Autoimmune diseases, chronic inflammation, stress disorders. Perhaps Wim Hof's method could be used in treating these diseases. And indeed, thousands of people began trying this method. Some said they got rid of chronic pain. Some said they emerged from depression. Some said they felt more energetic. Of course, this wasn't always scientifically proven. But people's experiences were there. Wim Hof's sons also began following their father's path. They too started adapting to the cold. They too learned breathing techniques. And they too, like their father, developed mind control. For Wim Hof, this was the greatest happiness, because he had been able to do something not just for himself, but for his children too. But Wim Hof's life wasn't always easy. The years after losing his wife were very hard for him. He had 4 children, and he had to raise them alone. Sometimes, when he woke up in the middle of the night, he still felt her absence. Sometimes, when he got up in the morning, he questioned the meaning of life. But every time, he went to the cold, because the cold gave him answers. Wim Hof said cold was therapy, physical as much as psychological therapy, because cold brought you to the present. There was no chance to think about the past or future. There was only that moment, and in that moment, you had to fight to survive. This philosophy had settled at the center of Wim Hof's life. He was teaching people not just how to deal with cold, but how to deal with life. To accept discomfort, to face difficulties, to overcome fear. One day at a conference, Wim Hof said this, "The modern world has softened us. Everything is at our fingertips. There's heating, cooling, food, water. But this comfort has also weakened us because we no longer face difficulties, and because we don't face them, we can't grow stronger. These words resonated in many people's hearts because people felt that modern life was leaving something incomplete. Yes, they were living comfortable lives, but were they happy? Yes, they had access to everything. But were they satisfied? No, because there was an emptiness inside them. And Wim Hof was offering a way to fill this emptiness. That way wasn't easy. Taking a cold shower every morning wasn't easy. Doing breathing exercises every day wasn't easy. Pushing yourself wasn't easy. But Wim Hof said this was necessary. Because to be strong, you needed to encounter difficulties. As years passed, Wim Hof's sphere of influence expanded. He was now working not just with individuals but with institutions. Armies approached him to train their soldiers. Professional sports teams started using his methods. Companies invited him to teach their employees how to deal with stress. And Wim Hof gave the same message every time. Your limits are much further than you think. Once, Wim Hof climbed Everest. But this wasn't an ordinary climb. He climbed in shorts and without shoes. Yes, you heard that right. He climbed the world's highest mountain almost naked. And he almost reached the summit. But a wound formed on his foot, and he had to turn back for safety reasons. Still, reaching that altitude in those conditions was incredible. Another time, Wim Hof ran a marathon in the Namib Desert. Without water. Yes, in the desert, in the heat, he ran a marathon without water. No one believed it. But he did it. Because his goal was to test how long the body could last without water. In another attempt, Wim Hof went to the North Pole. There, he swam in icy water. For hours. And he survived. Because his body had adapted to the cold so much that it no longer gave normal responses. All these records, all these attempts, showed the same thing. The human body was an incredible machine. And with the right training, the right mind, almost anything was possible. But Wim Hof wasn't breaking these records just for himself. He was breaking them to inspire people. To show them that, if I can do it, you can too. And indeed, thousands of people began following his path. On social media, videos of people trying the Wim Hof method began spreading. People were taking cold showers, doing breathing exercises, and saying their lives were changing. Of course, not everyone succeeded. Some people found this method too difficult. Some gave up halfway. But what mattered was that they dared to try. Because Wim Hof's message wasn't perfection. His message was effort. There was another turning point in Wim Hof's life. One day he was asked this question, "But what about you? Don't you have fear? Don't you have pain?" Wim Hof remained silent for a while. Then he said this, "Of course I do. I'm human too. I get scared too. I suffer too. But here's the difference. I don't run from these. I face them. Because I know that fear and pain are part of life. And if I run from them, I'll be running from myself too." This answer perfectly summarized Wim Hof's philosophy. He wasn't a superhuman. He was just someone who had accepted his own humanity. And this acceptance had given him incredible power. Over the years, many documentaries were made about Wim Hof. Books were written. Podcasts were recorded. And in each one, the same story was told. An ordinary man's extraordinary journey. But perhaps the most touching story was his relationship with his own children. After his children began following their father's path, they felt closer to him. Because he was no longer just a father, but also a mentor, a teacher, a friend. One of Wim Hof's sons said in an interview, "My father didn't just teach us how to withstand cold. He taught us how to withstand life. He showed us that difficulties aren't things to run from, but things to overcome." These words perfectly defined Wim Hof's legacy. He wasn't just a man who broke records. He was a man who taught people to see life through different eyes. And today, Wim Hof is still doing the same thing. He's still entering icy waters. He's still climbing mountains. He's still teaching people. But now, he's not just doing it for himself. Now, he's started a movement. And this movement is growing every day. Around the world, there are people practicing the Wim Hof method. They take cold showers every morning. They do breathing exercises. And they continue to push themselves. Because they learned that outside the comfort zone, real growth exists. Wim Hof's story teaches us many things. It teaches us that the human body is much stronger than we think. It teaches us that if the mind is trained correctly, almost anything is possible. It teaches us that pain and difficulty aren't things to run from, but things to embrace. But perhaps the most important lesson is this. Most of our limits are in our heads. When we tell ourselves, "I can't do this," we really can't. But when we say, "Maybe I can," everything changes. Wim Hof once said this, "People ask me, 'How are you so strong?' I tell them, 'I'm not strong. I just learned to accept my weakness.' Because strength isn't in denying weakness. It's in making peace with it. These words expressed a very deep truth. Real strength wasn't in being able to do everything, but in knowing your limits and trying to expand them. And Wim Hof was doing this every day, every hour, every moment. He was constantly pushing himself, but he was doing it not ruthlessly, but respectfully. He listened to his body, he listened to his mind, and he understood what both were saying. Some people criticized Wim Hof. "This is dangerous," they said. "People might try this and get hurt," they said. And they were right. Because Wim Hof's method could be dangerous if not done correctly. Entering cold water unprepared could lead to hypothermia. Doing breathing exercises wrong could cause dizziness or fainting. But Wim Hof was aware of this, and he warned people. "Start slowly," he said. "Listen to your body," he said. "Don't push yourself too hard," he said. Because the goal wasn't to harm yourself, but to strengthen yourself. And when done correctly, Wim Hof's method really worked. People felt more energetic. They became happier. They became more resilient. And most importantly, their self-confidence increased. Because once you can take a cold shower and endure it, you tell yourself, "I can do this." And this small victory reflects to other areas of your life. You can have that difficult conversation. You can take on that difficult project. You can overcome that fear. Wim Hof's message was basically this: small victories lead to big changes. And he had proven this many times in his own life. He started small. The first cold shower, the first breathing exercise, the first ice bath. And over time, these grew. Records, achievements, recognition, but none of it would have been possible without that first step. Today, Wim Hof is in his 60s, but he still moves like a young man. Still energetic, still passionate, still hungry for life, because he has learned to live, to truly live. And perhaps this is the biggest record he broke. Not what's written in the Guinness Book of Records. Being able to truly live life, despite fear, despite pain, despite losses. Wim Hof showed us that life isn't just breathing. Life is learning to breathe. Life is feeling the cold. Life is embracing difficulties. Life is pushing limits. And most importantly, life is finding ourselves. Because Wim Hof's journey, though it seemed like a journey outward, was actually a journey inward. He found himself in icy waters. He found himself on snowy mountains. He found himself in breathing exercises. And today, he's inspiring millions of people to take the same journey. He's showing them that the answers aren't outside, but inside. Strength isn't outside, but inside. And the real record isn't impressing others, but discovering yourself. Wim Hof's story is an ordinary man's extraordinary journey. But perhaps the most beautiful part is this. This story isn't over yet. Because Wim Hof is still on the road, still exploring, still learning, still growing. And we're growing with him. We draw inspiration from his story. We draw strength from his courage. And like him, we try to push our own limits. Because in the end, Wim Hof reminds us of this. Life is short. And in this short life, we can either be prisoners of our fears, or someone who overcomes them. The choice is ours. And Wim Hof made his choice. He chose to be the Iceman. But not just as someone who can withstand cold. As someone who can withstand life. As someone who can withstand pain. And most importantly, as someone who can stay true to himself. That's why his story affects us so much. Because this isn't just his story. This is all of our story. We all face our own icy waters. We all try to climb our own mountains. We all have to push our own limits. And Wim Hof showed us that this is possible. Difficult but possible. Painful but valuable. Scary but liberating. In the end, Wim Hof's message is very simple. You are much stronger than you think. You just need to believe it. You just need to try. You just need to take that first step. And who knows? Maybe you too will break your own record one day. Maybe you too will surpass your own limits one day. Maybe you too will become your own Iceman one day. Because in the end, the biggest record Wim Hof broke isn't written in Guinness. That record is written in defiance of fear. Despite fear, it lies in the power of the human spirit that can stand tall. Move forward despite pain and live despite losses. And this power exists in all of us. We just need to awaken it.